Hey guys, Mr. P. In this video, we're going to talk about how organisms are classified. And the first thing we need to do when discussing the classification of life is identify what our definition of a species is. And by definition, species are groups of living organisms that have recognizably distinct features, and those features are going to be unique to that particular species. And so if we look at the organisms on this page, we have a veiled chameleon, we have a fox, and we have this macaw. All three are obviously different species, but we know that because of the features that each one of these organisms possesses. The veiled chameleon is a reptile, the fox is a mammal, and the macaw is a bird. Birds are going to have feathers. They're obviously usually bright colored. Reptiles are going to have skin and scales. They're also cold-blooded, unlike the mammals and the birds. Mammals are going to have hair, mammary glands, producing milk, things like that. But all species are going to have these recognizably distinct features that keep them apart or unique from all other organisms on the planet. Linnaeus was the first person to come up with this classification system, and so his system of classification was the first formal system of grouping organisms, and he grouped them by these terms. In this system, organisms are grouped and subdivided into smaller categories of organisms, with species as the smallest and most exclusive grouping. And so you can think of it as each one of these gets more and more and more and more specific the farther you go. You also can assume that because each one of these levels gets more and more specific, the organisms that belong to a particular level will continue to shrink as you go from domain, which is the most basic and the most generic, all the way to species, which is the most specific. Linnaeus based the classification system as well as the names on the physical features of the organism. So he looked at the organism and he used the physical morphological classification or morphology as the basis of his particular system. So whether a organism had a certain number of digits, whether they had a certain number of legs, whether they had scales, whether they had hair, whether they had certain markings, all of those were morphology, and those were the morphological classifications that he used to decipher between different species. And it's important to note that this system is still in use today, even though it was created in 1735. And when we're trying to remember how to assort different organisms into these classification systems, I like to use a mnemonic device. I like to look at the first letter of each one of these classes or each one of these levels, and I like to use the mnemonic device of dumb kids playing chess on freeway get smashed. Obviously, I love playing chess. A lot of people love playing chess, but the freeway is not the place to be playing chess, otherwise you're going to get smashed. So, dumb kids playing chess on freeway get smashed. If you remember that mnemonic device, it'll help you put these levels in order, and it will help you hopefully classify organisms in the future. So when we focus on this particular classification system, species are named using this binomial nomenclature. So when you hear the term or terms binomial nomenclature, I want you to think about what the definition or what the meaning of this particular term means. And binomial means to name, bi means two, nomial means name. So this is a two-name classification system. Nomenclature means system of naming. So binomial nomenclature is a two-name system of naming, which is not shocking to learn that all organisms on the planet have a two-name designation. The first term indicates the genus, and that begins with a capitalized letter. The second term indicates the specific species. That's always a lowercase letter. It is never capitalized. In print, when you're reading a binomial nomenclature or a name, in print, the name is in italics and it is underlined if handwritten. So if you are using a genus and species name in written text, you need to underline it. After one use in a text, the genus can be abbreviated to the first letter. So you'll see that after the first time it's used in text, you can use the genus name. It still needs to be capitalized because remember the first term is capitalized. But you can shorten it to just the first letter of that genus, and then you always need to maintain the full species name, and again, the species is always not capitalized. When we look at a few of these particular organisms, you can see that all organisms have this two-name name. So Felis Concolor, Felis would be the genus, Concolor would be the species of a mountain lion. Then we have the bobcat, that's Lynx rufus. Again, the genus would be Lynx, the species would be Rufus. And then we have the common house cat, which is Felis domesticus, Felis being the genus and domesticus being the species. So when we look at these three organisms, you might think that these three are all related, and to some extent they are. However, if we look at the names, you obviously, hopefully, can see that two of these cats, felines, share the same genus. So the common house cat and the mountain lion are more closely related than either one of them is to the bobcat. However, when you look at the two cats and notice that the genus is different, the bobcat having a lynx genus and the Felis domesticus, or the house cat, has a felis, that tells us that even though they look the same or look similar in their morphology, they actually are more distantly related than the house cat is to the mountain lion. If we look at bears, for instance, because again, we can study any organism on the planet, this binomial nomenclature provides us many benefits. Each organism has a unique name that cannot be confused with another organism on the planet and often reflects evolutionary relationships between organisms. The names can be universally understood, no matter what nationality or culture is using the name, which enables scientists to talk to each other in the same language. And there is some stability in the system so that people cannot change the names of organisms without valid reasons. The planet is a really big space. There are a lot of organisms on the planet, and there are a lot of scientists that are studying these organisms. We need to have a really stable system of classification so that not only can we study these organisms with more stability, but we also can look at the relationships, evolutionarily speaking, to provide insight into how these organisms arose or how these organisms have evolved over time. When we look at these three bears, again, we have that same two-name system of classification. So we have Ursus arctos, that is our grizzly bear or brown bear. We have Ursus americanus, which is the black bear, and we have Ursus maritimus, which is the polar bear. Again, all three of these bears have the exact same genus. They have different species, so all three of these are in fact different species. You hopefully can tell that they're different species because they do look different. They have many morphological traits that are the same. They have the same kind of body shape and body pattern, but they obviously have different hair colors. But all three are pretty closely related because they belong to the same genus. So if we look at this classification system with one species in mind, you will see these terms pop back up: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Again, dumb kids playing chess on freeway get smashed. And we look at this through the context of a particular organism, in this case Ursus americanus, black bear. Predictions of characteristics and species in the same group probably share common ancestor, which indicates information about how species evolved. We look at the domain. In this particular species, the domain is eukarya, which means eukaryote. So this is a multicellular organism that is composed of eukaryotic cells. So this organism belongs in the domain of eukarya. But you'll notice not only is the black bear in this domain, the polar bear and the grizzly bear, which we just talked about, are also in this domain, but a whole bunch of other organisms, including all mammals, all reptiles, all amphibians, all fish, all birds, all insects, all plants, fungus, and protists on the planet belong to the same eukarya. Okay, so this would be the most basic and most generic in terms of our classification level. Then we go one level more specific, which is kingdom. This would be Animalia. So this would kick out all of our fungus or our decomposers. It would also kick out our protists like Paramecium. This would belong to all of the animals on the planet. Okay, so plants would obviously be thrown out. Then we go one level more specific and we go to phylum. Phylum in this case is Chordata. Chordata means the chordates, or the organisms that have a backbone. And so you can see that a lot of the sponges or the sea stars or the insects with exoskeletons would be thrown out of this particular classification. So we're getting a little bit more specific. Then we go one level further and we get to class. This would be Mammalia. So all mammals belong to this class. Again, the bears would belong to this because they are mammals, but this would not exclude any of the other mammals. Then we go to order. Order in this case would be Carnivora. So this would be the carnivores. These are the mammals that eat meat. Then we go to family, Ursidae. That would belong to all bears, not just our big 3 bears we talked about. Go one level further and we get to genus. This is the Ursus. All 3 of these bears belong to Ursus. Remember, all 3 of those on the previous slide had the genus Ursus. And then we go to the species, which is our specific organism, in this case Ursus americanus, the American black bear. And we have now 100% classified this organism from domain to species. We gave it the 2-name system, Ursus americanus. That is the genus and species name. It is the only organism on the planet that has that 2 species name, or that 2 binomial nomenclature, that 2-name classification system. Morphology has limitations though, okay? And if we look at these particular pictures, you'll see that there are a lot of similarities among different species. And so if we just focus on the meadowlarks, for instance, you might have thought that these are the exact same birds, and they look like it if you were to classify them based solely on the morphology. You have the eastern and western meadowlark bird, look very similar. However, they are in fact different species, and morphologically similar groups may be the result of convergent evolution and not actually members of the same species. And this is an example of that. Convergent evolution is a term, or is a phenomenon that we'll talk about when we get into more of the evolution content. However, convergent evolution is when 2 similarly looking organisms are distantly related, or maybe not be related at all, but because of similar ecological niches or ecological pressures, they've converged on a similar morphology because of the fact that they're using their resources in the same way. Advances in DNA technology has revealed that many different species are almost identical in their DNA base sequences. So if you look at this dark-throated or marsh, or the tawny-bellied, I think these are thrushes, these are birds, you'll notice that these look very different. However, because we have advanced our DNA technology so much, and that we have actually started or begun to sequence a lot of the organisms on the planet in terms of their genome sequencing, it has actually given rise to our understanding, or an increased understanding on how organisms actually are related, or if they're related at all. And a lot of birds, in this case, that look different are actually very closely related and have almost identical DNA base sequences. And that's it for this video. If you learned something, give it a thumbs up. If you have a question, leave it in the comments. Consider subscribing to the channel. See ya!